speed, power, flexibility. The airplane did everything. It was an excellent air-to-air machine. It was superb in conventional air-to-ground, and although we never used it as such, it was very, very capable as a nuclear bomber if that had come to pass. It did everything. It was versatility personified. I initially checked out in the F-4 in late 1968 and went directly to Southeast Asia from F-4 checkout.
Now, in 1968, would Phantom pilots consider themselves to be in the best air-to-air platform?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for its day, I would think so. Yeah.
And why would that be? Where would that confidence come from?
I think experience. Most of the aircraft we had at the time were either pretty much dedicated air to ground. The F-100 airplanes like that, the 105. Although it acquitted itself well in air to air, that was by necessity. But it wasn't really an air-to-air machine. Neither was the Phantom, for that matter. It was designed as a naval aircraft to begin with. The Navy bought it, and the Air Force picked up on it. But simply because of the speed, the armament capabilities, the maneuverability, it turned into an excellent air-to-air machine. The fact that the Air Force had not a lot of different types of airplanes at the time. The F-100, 105, primarily air to ground. It had interceptors in the 102 and the 106, but those really were not in the same ballpark. They didn't do the same things as the Phantom, and they didn't spend a lot of time, for example, in Southeast Asia.
Talk to me about your first deployment in Southeast Asia.
Well, there was only one. It was a permanent change of station. I was there from January of 1969 to December of '69. Got home just in time for Christmas. I was at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand that hosted the 8th TAC Fighter Wing, which a couple of years before had been commanded by Robin Olds, quite a legend in the aviation world. He was long gone, but the 8th was still doing a bang-up job. We had 4 squadrons of F-4s and lots of cats and dogs. There were Thai T-28s there. There were AC-130 gunships. It was a big operation. Was Ubon.
And what were your first impressions of the base?
Well, it was fairly. It wasn't primitive because by the time I got there, it had been there for quite some time. So as we Americans do, we had tried to turn it into a little bit of America. There was a very, very nice officers' club. There was a cinema. There was a swimming pool. There was a bowling alley. We had all the comforts of home in a combat base, and certainly it was geared up for war 24 hours a day, and that's what we did. It was a 24/7 type of war that we were flying out of there.
And what was your mission?
Primarily interdiction. We had ceased bombing the North by the time I got there in '69 to any great extent, and our job, although we weren't talking about it at the time, was interdiction of goods and services and personnel coming down from North Vietnam through Laos into South Vietnam. And our job all day, all night, every day, every night was to stop the trucks, stop the transport, stop the movement of goods and services, if you will, down to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam where they could fight with it.
And what would you be armed with for these?
Oh, all sorts of stuff. We mostly carried, at the time, we were mostly carrying dumb bombs. We were carrying general purpose bombs, 500, 750 pounders, occasionally actually bigger than that. We carried lots of cluster bomb units for flak suppression, CBU 24, 49. We carried napalm from time to time. And every now and then, because we were flying D models that didn't have a gun, we'd load up a gun pod and carry that. So
were the external gun pods effective?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the guys got some kills with the gun pod, but to be quite honest, it was less than totally accurate because it was just bolted onto the center line of the aircraft. So it did its job. If you were lucky and you had one that was good, it would do a wonderful job. Otherwise, it was a little bit erratic.
And what was it like deploying the other weapons you mentioned?
Well, it depended on the mission. Now, a lot of it, of course, was stopping the trucks. We almost always worked with a forward air controller, an OV-10, generally, or an O2, and we deployed from fairly high level with using high angle dive bombing, 30, 45, sometimes 60-degree dive bombing. Very little in the way of electronic assistance for that. It was all look through the gun sight and do your thing, more or less. There were a couple of systems, one called dive toss in the A-10 in the F-4 that was reasonably effective sometimes. But mainly it was visual bombing and from high angles. The only alternative to that was we also laid a fair number of mines on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that required a low level pass at as fast as we could get that puppy to go, and that release. We released them all at once and seeded the trail, so hopefully trucks would run over them and blow up.
And are they by parachute or are they just free fall?
Well, there are a number of different kinds of them. Some of them were free fall. Some of them were not parachute as such, but what we call snake eyes. They were bombs with fins that deployed when you dropped the bomb, that opened up, and the bomb kind of nosed over into a vertical thing and came down. But there were all sorts of different kinds.
And the way you describe it, it wasn't hugely automated. There was a lot of pilot skill involved.
Oh, yeah.
in the bombing. So was there some variation in the accuracy between different crews?
Yeah, of course. You're going to get good guys and you're going to get bad guys.
Right.
But everybody got pretty good over there because we were doing it often and regularly, and it was the kind of thing that you were accustomed to and getting better at it as you went along.
You mentioned day missions and night missions.
Mm-hmm.
Which did you prefer?
I think at the end of the day, I preferred the night missions because not because I like flying at night very much. Most fighter pilots don't, but because that's where the action was. That's when they were moving all their goods. A lot of the movement down the trail was at night, and of course, consequently, we had a lot to do at night. We supported a number of other aircraft, C-130s, call sign Blind Bat, that went out and tried to locate the trucks and things. And when they did, them or the FAC, when they located them, they'd call us in. We would drop under flares sometimes not, and try to get the trucks. Because they were moving a lot of trucks, they were also deploying their guns along the trail. So we took a fair amount of anti-aircraft fire at night. But what I liked more about the night than the day was when they were shooting at you, you could see it.
So did you feel safer or less safe on night missions?
I didn't feel safe on any of them. No.
Right.
If you felt safe, you might as well pack up and go home. You weren't on the edge.
And was any of the aircraft you were in ever hit?
Oh yeah, we took some hits. Some very minor ones, and one I remember particularly took out a chunk of the horizontal stabilizer about that big, 37 millimeter, I think, that took out one of the blades of the horizontal stabilizer.
And how aware of that were you while you were flying? Was that more?
Oh, very.
Very much. Right?
Soon as we took the hit, we knew we had a hit. We had taken a hit. We knew it was a big one, and we safed up the switches, or we toggled off the bombs, I think, probably, rather than safed up the switches, and we headed for home. And the good old F-4 double ugly. It flew wonderfully all the way home. We did a controllability check before we landed. It was a little ropey. It felt a little funny, but it never batted an eye. It brought us down, put us on the ground, and got us to the bar.
Was it a very tough airframe?
Oh, extremely. Yeah, extremely. It took lots and lots of hits in lots of different environments, and did very, very well.
And how do you feel when 10 minutes after you've landed an aircraft with a big chunk that's been shot off?
Relieved,
Right.
I guess. Yeah, I mean, we because it was dark, we didn't have a real good look at it then. We took a better look at it the next morning, and it was a lot more frightening when we looked at it than when we were busy trying to compensate for it.
And is that on your mind the next day when you're taking off?
No,
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 it can't
yeah,
be. Or,
business as usual.
right. Which systems on the F-4? So which model are we talking about at the moment?
Well, the combat tour was in the D model. I flew all of them, C's, D's, and E's at one time or another. But the combat tour was the F-4D.
The D. And which pieces of equipment on the D worked well, and which ones not so well?
In some ways, the radar was better on the D model than on subsequent ones. In other ways, it wasn't. But everything else worked very much the same. I mean, the Phantom was the Phantom. It was big and robust, and it did just about anything. Obviously, as you went up in models, they put enhancements on it from time to time, like leading edge slats on the E model or some of the E models and that kind of thing. But in essence, if you flew an F-4, you flew an F-4. They were all very, very much alike.
Was there a speed range or altitude that the F-4 favoured, that the aircraft seemed happiest at?
No, I wouldn't think so. I mean, we favored an altitude that kept us out of small arms range. But it was good. The airplane was good from very low altitude, where it went really rapidly, up to 30,000 or so. Above that, like most airplanes, it got a little sluggish. But it was pretty good throughout the spectrum. That was another part of its versatility.
And is it a large or small cockpit?
As fighter cockpits go, I'd say about in the middle. Okay, the A-10 was a little bit bigger cockpit. It gave you a bit more room. Some other airplanes, smaller. It was adequate. I mean, you had time to. I mean, you were able to turn around more or less within the constraints of your parachute risers. The visibility was not great in the F-4. Certainly not from the back seat, but it was not great from the front seat either. They improved that in subsequent airplanes, but the cockpit layout was reasonable. You got used to it, and it was pretty well designed.
If you could have requested some new kit or modifications to the F-4 you were flying at that time, would there have been things you would have liked?
Yeah, but most things that I would have liked were not yet in existence. I mean, a top-notch navigational system for one. The F-4 had an inertial navigator, but it was a 50s technology. It was done with gyros, so it precessed. It was reasonably accurate, but when we landed, it would be a mile or two off, which was not unusual for that era. But I think that probably would have been the biggest thing I'd looked for. Certainly wouldn't have asked for anything different in terms of engine or performance, anything like that. Airplane was beautiful in that respect.
Did the maintainers like it?
I'm not so sure. I think they loved it really in a way, but a lot of them found it awfully difficult to work with. They had a malady called phantom bites, which had to do with banging your head on various protuberances, because the airplane was a strange looking airplane. As you know, it had tail that drooped down and things like that, and the guys on the ground were always banging their heads on this or that, or ripping their fingers on something else. But when they look back, and if you look at social media today, where guys who are crew chiefs and the Phantom write on it, they loved it.
Right. Were you carrying Sparrow missiles?
We did some. We didn't carry a lot of air-to-air stuff, because at the time I was over there, we weren't going north. But yeah, we would carry Sparrows. We would occasionally carry AIM-9s, depending on the early model of the AIM-9, depending on the mission. If we were escorting, for example, B-52s on arc lights, we would carry some of those things. Not that they ever got jumped by MiGs, but obviously the potential was there, and we wanted to be ready for those kind of.
And did you have greater confidence in Sparrows or Sidewinders?
The early Sparrow had its problems. The early Sidewinder had its problems, but I mean, for its day, what we had was top of the line. So, in essence, I fired a couple of Sparrows. Those were after the combat tour, and they did the job. And I fired a few Sidewinders, and they've done the job. So, as missiles go, for their era, I think they were both pretty good.
And did Phantoms carry any other air-to-air missiles?
I think earlier they carried the AIM-4D, the Hughes rocket, which most people thought was rubbish.
Right, and what was rubbish about that? What was...
It was not very user friendly. If you wanted to use it, you had to super cool the seeker head before you could actually lock on and use it. And that was a process of, I forget how long it took, but it took a long, long time of holding the button down to cool the seeker head. And by that time, if you were chasing somebody, he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you were intending to engage with somebody, you were out of time and out of luck. So it didn't perform very well. It didn't last very long. We didn't use them for very long.
Is there, from your time in Asia, is there a particular mission that stands out to you?
No, there were dozens of them.
Right.
But you know, any mission that involved us protecting another asset, for example, the AC-130s were great missions, challenging missions. The AC-130, the gunship, Spectre gunship, was pretty vulnerable because it orbited to the left. It found trucks and things on the road. You need to do anything? Okay. It found trucks on the road, and when it did, it would fire. And when it fired, it lit itself up, and the gunners on the ground had something to shoot at. Well, as soon as they started firing at the AC-130, it was our job to shut them down. And that was very possibly the most rewarding mission that those of us who were flying interdiction day and night had most of the time. But there were lots of them.
And did you see the AC-130s doing their work?
Oh yeah.
And what does that look like?
Well, the gun was absolutely awesome. When they fired, it was something to behold. We were always above them, and we were deconflicted by altitude. We were always above them. They had lights on the tops of their wings, so we could keep track of them. Nothing on the bottom, of course, but they had lights on the top of their wings that we could watch them as they orbited. Their orbit was very predictable, which was good for us and also good for the gunners on the ground. So in essence, We could watch them, and they'd let us know when they were about to fire. We would the switches would be greened up. We'd be armed and ready to go, and they'd let us know, and then they'd put on a light show for us because their gunnery was simply magnificent.
And what did it look like from your altitude? Would it be streaks of yellow, or would it...
Yeah, they had tracers. They had tracers on all their rounds, so you would see this great barrage of tracers go out from the airplane for a finite period of time. Then they'd stop, and then they'd continue around in the orbit until they got back around again. But yeah, it was spectacular.
Right, right. And life on the base.
Yep.
Was there much? Was there much socialising? Would you drink the day before a mission?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the rule of thumb has always been 12 hours from bottle to throttle, and most of the time that was honored scrupulously. I mean, nobody actively went out and tried to go out flying when they were a bit impaired. Although sometimes you partied a little longer than you wanted to, but yeah, the social life, the boys' life, as it were, at the time. Very few ladies around. No women aircrew at the time, but the social life was quite something. The club never closed, open 24 hours a day.
What was the club called?
Just the U-Bahn Officers Club.
Right.
Yeah, no fancy names to it. The drinks were laughably cheap, no matter what you were drinking, whether it was a single malt or a beer. It was 25 cents per measure, per shot, per glass. And obviously, with the job we were doing, it was a very popular place. They had good food. Good entertainment. They brought in lots of bands from the local area, Thai bands that played, and girls that danced and that kind of thing. The waitresses were a comely lot. They were lovely young girls. Lots of the guys married them at the end of the day. Yeah, I mean, let's face it. When you weren't flying missions, there wasn't a whole lot to do. So you socialized, and the social life was the camaraderie, I guess you'd call it, was something that I never matched since, and will never see again.
Do you think combat is a very bonding experience?
Oh, very, very much so. Yeah, very much so. You rely on other guys to have your back. You work as a team. You work as a team of whether in a single aircraft or a flight of 2 or a flight of 4. It just expands the team. And it's the kind of thing that, again, and I write about this in the book a lot, that the fraternity of fighter pilots has something that I think no other group can have in terms of cohesion, in terms of bonding, in terms of camaraderie. And I do specify that perhaps cops and firefighters might come close, but in essence, you certainly don't find it in the civilian world anywhere.
And do you feel a familiarity with fighter pilots that you haven't served with, but just that personality type?
Oh yes, indeed. They're all alike.
How would you define that?
I don't think you can define it. I think I've tried in the book to define it, but
we should say, what is the name of your book?
The book is called From F-4 Phantom to A-10 Warthog: Memoirs of a Cold War Fighter Pilot. And what I tried to do in the book is not to talk about Steve Ladd's aeronautical achievements, because I didn't do anything that 1,000 other guys didn't do. But I wanted to talk about exactly what we're talking about now: the personality, the culture, the cult of the fighter pilot, what makes fighter pilots tick. And you ask about other fighter pilots. Oh yeah, I mean, you get together with Brits or Australians, you get together with French or Germans. fighter pilots are fighter pilots. I once met, and again described in the book, I once had the opportunity to meet a guy named Viktor Belenko, who was a Russian fighter pilot who defected with his MiG-25 in 1975, 76, something like that. Defected to Japan. He took his airplane and he left his family and everything else, and he headed across the water and landed at an airport in Japan that wouldn't accommodate the airplane, so it went off the end of the runway and chewed up lots of ground at the end of it. But he defected to the United States, and I met him for an evening because the Air Force was sending him around to talk to other fighter pilots, because the best intelligence we could possibly get would be to talk to somebody on the other side and find out how they did things and whether they did them well or not so well or what the thing was. Nevertheless, he was different. His English was coming along. There's no doubt in my mind he was a fighter pilot. I knew that when he walked through the door. It's just a feeling you get.
And what kind of person was he?
He was a great guy,
Yeah.
and he had a sense of humor. He was obviously, he had guts, or he wouldn't have taken his airplane and headed for Japan. But he was very, very bright, and he was very interested in what we did and how we did it. And he was very open about how the Soviets operated their fighters. So he was great company. Fighter pilot, good in the bar.